If it's up to you, you won't be able to access the computer from there.
Oh, yeah, that's working with the PDF.
All right, you are live.
So I can then, and I can sit here and do that.
Yeah.
That was good.
Okay,
We're
live.
We're live.
You want me to sit there? Okay.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the everyone who's joining us on site for this exciting talk today, and for the audience on Zoom and on YouTube. So we have Ayesha Barenblat with us today, joining us to present us the sustainable fashion initiatives that Remake, the organization that Ayesha founded and is CEO of, is organizing across the globe. So over to you, Ayesha.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. It's a nice, cozy crowd. And to those of you online, I am really looking forward to this being an interactive conversation and to really share with you the ways that we are working to make sure that fashion is a force for good. So sort of 2 seconds on me. I'm Ayesha. I've spent the last 20 years in the industry. I first did a lot of work on the inside of fashion brands, advising them on their sustainability. I worked with Gucci, H&M, Nike, Levi's. And for me, this was really about how much can we get businesses to really embed sustainability into their business practices. One of the things I learned there is there's just so much you can do as an individual business, having worked with small and large brands, because the playing field is not level. So I then went on to work for the United Nations for a program called Better Work. And what we did there was we would bring governments, brands, and labor organizers together in countries where our clothes are made to address working conditions. So things like child labor, forced labor, environmental harm. And it was during that time, our offices were in Geneva, that Rana Plaza fell down. How many of you know or remember Rana Plaza? Yeah. It's interesting because it's almost 10 years now since Rana Plaza, but you know, at that time, 1,134 garment workers lost their lives. April 24th is the anniversary. And so for me, it was really a moment to say, gosh, we need to have change sooner and faster. Even though there are thoughtful brands, even though there are coalitions working to try and improve conditions, you know, where are we as citizens, as designers, as people working in and around this industry, and how can we really be a part of the solution? And so I left my wonderful UN job to start Remake 10 years ago. Hard to know we're a decade old. And our big ambition at Remake is this: we unite change makers in our collective fight to really center human rights and climate justice in the fashion industry. So that's, you know, when it comes to fair pay and climate justice, people say a lot of things when it comes to sustainability. Frankly, it's not regulated. The US and Europe are starting to look at some regulation because there is so much greenwashing out there. For us, when we think about what's the core tenets of sustainability, it really comes down to fair pay and climate justice, because those, to me, all roads tie back to that. And if a company is not really talking about this, we're not really thinking of this as an industry, as an ecosystem, then we are not getting anywhere. So if we move to the next slide, I wanted to first sort of, you know, really just lay out a bit of the sort of problems in the industry, but then focus most of our time on solutions and to talk to you all. It's a nice, fun crowd, so, you know, keep this very interactive. What we really do at Remake is a lot of campaign work, passing laws. There's a lot of sustainable, ethical brands that are part of our movement to say, look, it's very hard for us without the right regulations to thrive. We certainly saw this in the pandemic with a lot of thoughtful brands that just weren't able to function. And so for us, when we think about sustainability, myself having tried within the business context, within the multilateral context, is we have to do this from a campaign and law standpoint, because unless it's the law, we don't make progress. So let's talk for 2 seconds in terms of like, what are the big issues on hand? How many clothes do you all think we produce today, ballpark?
Per day, per month?
Per year.
Per year.
Yeah, per year, just total output of product. Like, how much do you think we make?
Billions of things.
Billions.
Billions.
But how many billions?
Okay, 100.
Coming in hot. So this is really interesting because you're not wrong, you're not wrong, but actually the thing that scares we don't know. And I tell you why. So since 2015, we have been evaluating fashion brands on their human rights, on their climate records. We produce a scorecard. And one of the things we've been asking increasingly is, how many clothes do you produce? Because if you're setting your climate targets, you're setting your human rights targets, without that data on total volume, we don't even know what we're up against. And what we know from analyst estimates is that the number is between 100 billion and 120 billion. That's a big range. And the reason we don't know is because the data is squishy. Of the top 50 fashion brands that have over 100 million in revenue that we just evaluated, only 4 disclose how much they produce. And that's from years of campaigning. So think about, okay, say we say the conservative estimate of 100 billion units of clothes. How many people are there on the planet? We just passed 9. We just hit the $9 billion mark. So for 9 billion people, we are making 100 billion units of clothes. And most of those clothes end up in Ghana or Chile in a landfill or a waterway or a beach within the first year of production. And that to me is the thing that we have to tackle if we are to make progress. Because the truth is, the only way to make clothes of that volume is to have mixed fiber. You all know this. You know, if we think about it, I've been in this industry, you've been in this industry, you even look at some of the luxury lines and the materials we were using, it was more virgin material, right? Linen, cotton. You'll be hard pressed today to find anything that isn't polyester blend. What is polyester? Oil. Do you know the biggest producer of polyester yarn in the world today? Reliant. The Ambani family. Anyone saw the sort of billionaire Rihanna was performing? It was in India. Largest producer of polyester yarn in the world. So here's the other question that we ask fashion companies, because you all know, I mean, here I am in the Bay Area. Sometimes I'm in other contexts and, you know, saying the word climate crisis is a dirty word, but we can all agree that the climate crisis is here and upon us. And even though a lot of the conversation is around the airline industry or transportation, our industry is often forgotten. The thing is, with the overproduction and use of oil, to your point, fossil fuel, what we are seeing even as green technology for solar or for car manufacturing is starting to take an uptick. In our industry, the graph in terms of reliance on fossil fuel and chemicals is going up. And for us, really, that correlation and understanding is the only way to make so many clothes so cheap, so disposable, that are ending up being thrown, is to rely on fossil fuel. And again, the numbers are squishy because even with data, most climate emissions happen where our clothes are cut and stitched. So that's in the supply chain. And so there isn't a lot of good data. And so most companies will say it's between 3 to 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions comes from the fashion industry. That's a very wide range. But I will tell you again, from evaluating companies year over year, because at least now companies have more science-based targets on how they're going to reduce their climate emissions. In evaluating them for last year, every single company in our accountability report, and that's top 50 brands because they really control most of the market share, every one of them missed their target. Why do you think that is? So meaning while the rest of the world is, you know, we're moving to different forms of energy, with the fashion industry, the reliance on fossil fuel is actually going up. Any thoughts? Why is that? I'll go here and then, yes. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking prices, like people, especially like I feel like this year, people want everything cheap, cheap, cheap.
Yes. So prices is a huge part of this. I don't know if you all saw the story of Renewcell filing bankruptcy. It was one of the sort of big promises in the industry of, you know, an innovative way to recycle. We know anything to do with recyclable materials, innovation in this industry requires capital. Innovation takes time. And the fiber that is cheapest today is fossil fuel. And that for most industry, because it has been this race to the bottom, and I put high street luxury and fast fashion in those categories, the only way to get there, because we are in this price cutting market, is that reliance on fossil fuel. The other thing that has really changed is clothes have become more disposable. Those of you designers that are more of mine, it didn't used to be that our clothes were disposable. Now we are designing and making in a way. Think particularly of Shein or Temu, right? A $1 shirt, a $3 shirt. It's made of a quality that's not built to last. And so for us, when you think about sustainability, it really is the climate crisis is upon us. We're using too much fossil fuel. We're making too many clothes too cheap, and we're making them for disposability. But you'll see in a lot of our images, it's a lot of women rising up, right? And so I think a big part of the sustainability conversation that's forgotten is the human side of this crisis. So what comes to mind when I tell you human rights in fashion?
Factories.
Factories, say more.
Buyers.
Buyers.
The codes that people keep in those factories and people actually passing away in them.
Children.
Nobody makes a livable wage.
Nobody makes 93% of the 70 million people who make our clothes around the world. And by the way, in Katso factories, it's mostly women of color. It's Black and brown women. So there is a racial gendered lens to why this work is important. 93% say I don't make a living wage. What does that mean? It means I can't put in enough food on the table. It means I don't make enough to live a life of dignity. Our industry is valued at $2.5 trillion. And so when we say that an average Bangladeshi worker, especially when for this last December, they were fighting, and there's some images in there, like fighting for the most basic thing that our minimum wage hasn't gone up in 5 years. Everything around me, food, electricity, rent is getting more expensive. Inflation is out of control. You know what the workers were met with? Police brutality, violence, imprisonment. Outside of China, Bangladesh is the biggest producer of our clothes today. And so when we think of this conversation, you know, and a lot of sustainability, particularly the innovation coming out of brands want to talk about capsule collections, recycling, sustainable materials, we're sort of leaving the elephant in the room, which is how are we to divest from fossil fuel? How are we to not overproduce at a volume that our Earth's natural resources cannot sustain? And how are we not to forget the women who power this industry in this conversation? You know, you mentioned safety, and that's a really important piece. And I founded Remake after Rana Plaza fell down because I was part of that team within the UN that was sitting across from Rand's Children's Place, Walmart, that were in that very building. And, you know, part of our question was, are you going to compensate the workers whose families rely on the income? And the answer was, but these are not our workers. We literally had to have journalists dig through the rubble of Rana Plaza to prove that the labels were in there in order for the brands to have the conversation. There was a compensation fund set up, and I tell you, it wasn't even a drop in the bucket for most companies, but a lot of them kept that donation anonymous because, again, subcontracting the supply chain is a part of the business model. Right? For most brands, it's to say, then I divest of the human rights. But by the way, for countries to keep their wages artificially low, like a place of Bangladesh, helps my bottom line. When we circulated to companies to sign on to letters, say workers are asking for 23,000 taka, which is not even $100 a month, and the factories are saying it's going to be less than half that, outside of Patagonia, not a single company was willing to come and say, yes, this is the number we should rally around. And so I just wanted to paint that picture for you all that when we think about sustainability, like let's forget all the jargon and really have this conversation around, here's a $2.5 trillion industry, one of the largest employer of women, women of color around the world. Can we set up the right ecosystem to get her paid fairly, for her to live a safe job of dignity? And can we be creating and making clothes in a way that's not overproducing and relying on fossil fuel? That is our vision for what a beautiful fashion ecosystem would look like. So before I stop and get into solutions, I'd love any questions you all may have.
Yeah, we have a few comments actually from Zoom. One comment is haute couture is sustained by approximately 200 families or people for over a century. Just to reiterate on how small the group is.
Yeah.
We also have other comments from our over 20 attendees on Zoom that they don't hear us really well. So
Oh.
maybe we take a moment to slightly rearrange things.
Would you like to
Raise the
move
voices a little
this
better.
here? Is this better if we're closer to?
We
Yes?
can't really.
Hello? You can hear me.
Trying to
Yes.
influence how
Yeah,
our-
let me, I
our
could move
Zoom
my
guests-
chair, or I could come here. How's that?
That works.
Yeah? Can they hear me better now?
Let's
I didn't
get
mean to make
closer.
you, yes.
Yes, let's see if we can rearrange our webcam to see you differently. We're just taking a quick housekeeping moment
Yes,
to help our.
we
Zoom
want you
attendees.
to be able to see us and hear us and,
Yes, people
Yeah.
say it's better.
okay.
Better, let's see how well we see you. We'll see you from behind.
It's just photos.
Let's take another moment of maybe rearranging the webcam.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's
want
the
to move-
workers demanding the 23,000 taka minimum wage for months and months. Our Bangladeshi partners were out there.
Maybe want to remove that table altogether. Move your camera.
How much,
It's less than $100 a month.
and that's how much, that's minimum.
That's what workers wanted. The wage ended up being set closer to 12,500 taka, so half of that. After 5 years of the minimum wage not going up. But here was something interesting when we talked to the factories, right? Because in talking to some of my brand friends, again, I started in the industry, was to say, how can this be so difficult? A lot of the brands said, look, we don't want to wade into the national conversation. This is about sovereignty of Bangladesh. So then we talked to the factories because, you know, the Factory Industry Association in Bangladesh is quite powerful. And they sent me a chart. And for those of you who are interested, I can share the chart afterwards, but it was FOB price over the last decade. Anyone knows what FOB price is? It's freight on board, like what the price that's paid. And what the factory shared was that the FOB price for Bangladesh had not gone up in a decade. So essentially saying that it's quite tongue in cheek for brands to say, we don't want to wade into the national conversation in Bangladesh. It's up to the government and the factories. Of course, workers should make a living wage. Here, have a look at our code of conduct. We say that this should be the, you know, whatever workers need sorted out. But then the factory is coming back to us and saying, but look at over the last decade, what you are paying us per unit cost has not gone up. And in fact, what we saw in the pandemic was a dip in that prices. And so in our accountability report, a lot of what we talk about is commercial practices as a part of sustainability. What does a good contract look like? What are fair conditions with which we place product? And as you all perhaps end up working at a brand someday or start your own label, you know, there's a lot of talk today about the partnership between the manufacturing partners and the creative brand side of things. But in reality, that partnership is really broken because the power structures are not fair. You know, how can you really be a partner to a factory when you're the customer and you're calling the shots? How can you really be a partner to a factory when you decide the price point? And so, you know, really when we think about sustainability, it's just to be thinking about, and first and foremost, humanizing who are the people who make our clothes? What are their lives like? Who is she? And how can we assure, much like a designer, a model, a creator, that she is a core part of this industry? And so, you know, the very word remake is this play on words to remake our connections with the hands that bring our fashion creations to life. Pre-pandemic, one of the things that we used to do at Remake, and we're seeing how we can bring this back, is we would run competitions with fashion schools where promising designers, we take them to production hubs to meet with garment workers and see what mass production looks like. Because, you know, now that we have so segmented our industry, often you could be designing and never seeing what that looks like. So students from Parsons, students from California College of the Arts came with us to Sri Lanka, came with us to Mexico. We went home with workers. We had meals with her. We saw what her living conditions were like.
And then certain things started to click, like say, as a designer, you change a color or change a last minute detail. What does that mean for her? It means that she's going to be working a longer day. It means that perhaps an 8 to 10 hour day has suddenly become a 12-hour day. It means that she's going to be worried walking back to her dormitory or her home because the street lamps aren't great and she's worried about sexual assault. And so just starting to have these conversations around, and oh, the black runoff is that's entering the Bangladeshi rivers, like my one design choice, what does that mean for the waterways and the communities? And so, if you all are interested, we have shorts on our website, it's a Made-in series where you can really get to meet the people who make our clothes. And that to me is really one of the first solutions. Let's get away from the sustainability jargon and real talk. Let's sort of bear witness and get to know the human side and the environmental side. One of our partners, the OR Foundation, runs a campaign called Speak Volumes. They do beach cleanups. Ghana, Accra, Ghana is one of the biggest destinations of where our clothes end up. And honestly, when you see the mountains and mountains, that's actually some of the CC and Parsons students in Sri Lanka meeting with workers and their families and seeing the living conditions and sort of really understanding, what can a wage afford in very human terms. And some of them have gone on to work in the industry and often tell me that experience has been very life-meaning for them. And on the climate side, really, it's the same way that we're really trying to unpack past the jargon for you to see. So the Speak Volumes campaign, for example, if you're curious, and you can, the Instagram of OR Foundation is really powerful. They show you the labels of the brands that they're cleaning up every week in their beaches, and also showing how it's really decimated their own markets. Because that's something else I think we often talk about is, as long as it's donated, as long as it's recycled, we are doing good. But we know that less than 10% of anything that we donate actually ends up in the secondhand market. Because we have too many goods, like the conversation we started. And so most of it ends up becoming Ghana's problem. And what our partners there will tell us is it destroys our local economies to have all these cheap clothes flooding. And by the way, to your point, because it's so much poorer quality than it was a decade ago, it's mostly our waste problem. You're colonizing waste. You're making your waste our problem. And so what can we do in terms of solutions? And really, that's what Amy and Sophia and I here, I was like, this is the part where no longer depressing you and really wanting to have a conversation around the power of what happens. Because look, much like many of you, I love fashion. I love the beauty and creativity of expression. I love what it can mean in terms of livelihood for so many people. I love when you put on something that means something to you, how that puts your statement out in the world. At Remake, you'll see we're all wearing, our slogan is, wear your values. And I sort of ask you, like, what is your value system? Like, if you think, especially for those of you in the fashion, like, what are your values and what do you want the clothes that you wear and the clothes that you make represent? What would that be? And no wrong answers. What is that value system? Because it's an invitation, really,
Well, as a designer, I like to make sure that it's something that I've either upcycled or I've bought secondhand from a resale site or a resale shop. I like continuing the story of a clothing, especially if it's like from my grandma or something. I'm like, yeah.
So your values is sort of the story the clothes will tell and the fact that it's had a long life.
Yeah.
Through upcycling. Yes.
Years ago, I was in Mexico with my husband and I gave birth to my son. And I was really shocked because his aunt who took care of us had this huge machine. It's like circular, and she puts like the collar of the sweater and the bulky part. She puts it together like this, and then the machine goes and she does it over and over and over and over again. And she has these huge bags full of it. And then this person comes, picks it up, and then she told me that they paid her, but very little to do that. And I was like, I thought this was something that was done in factories. She's like, oh, sometimes they source like people, like
Yeah,
bringing
the
them
overruns
home.
of the factories go into homework. And in fact, you know, when I was visiting some of the artisan supply chain of luxury brands, I was amazed to learn that the artisans were making the same as they would in a local market versus if they're producing, you know, for collections that were worth thousands of dollars. I don't know if you all have been watching the recent LVMH scandal with the $9,000 sweater that's the farmers are not even paid for. So, you know, this idea, to your point of, you know, home workers, luxury workers, like what I'm hearing from you as part of the value system is let's just pay people fairly
Or
because this is hard work.
knowing where it comes from.
Yeah.
Because the sweaters that she puts together are sold in a store called Palacio de Hierro in Mexico City, and that's like one of the most expensive stores you can, people pay a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's just so sad.
So traceability and wage equity is part of and that's something we call on the industry to disclose, like where are these things being made? That was, I think, one of the biggest wins we had in the 1990s, actually, under the Clinton era, that, you know, you could at least on your label say made in. Because before that, we didn't even have that. And when I started down this line, it used to be that brands would absolutely refuse to tell you what factories they were sourcing from, citing that this was, you know, intellectually important to keep. I will say that that has changed a lot today. Today, you know, most top fashion brands tell you at least the factories, but then to your point, what about the subcontracting? What about the home workers? A lot of the brands that were in Rana Plaza didn't even know they were in Rana Plaza because it was a subcontract. They had gone to a factory that was at overcapacity, who backed out the back door, gave it to another factory, and on the complex nature goes. But in terms of solutions, you know, when we say where are your values, it's a lot of what you all are saying. So first we have this product, right? The fashion accountability report, where we are calling on the industry to give us the traceability, give us the overproduction data. We put it out as a love letter for classrooms, for educators, for lawmakers, because you can only make progress once you know where you're at. And so for us, it's as a nonprofit that takes no money from the industry to scorecard to say, well, how are we doing against the lofty promises? So that's one solution, you know, to sort of read and share on. The other thing that we really believe in is the power of grassroots movement building. You know, it's to say for us who work in and around the fashion industry, how can we really lock arms to say, hey, we love this industry, but the way it's moving, at the pace it's moving, it's no longer representing my values. And so I would rather there's an ecosystem of the sustainable small ethical brands thriving, you know, rental being an actual solution, thinking of keeping our clothes in generation longer. And so within Remake, we have 2,000 ambassadors, and Amy and Sophia Maria are organizers for the Bay Area and here to share more about how you can get involved locally if you're interested, because we really believe in building that grassroots power. And so our 2,000 ambassadors today reach 4 million community members. And these are brand founders, these are labor leaders, these are innovators, these are everyday citizens. And through that power of a collective, we win campaigns. An example for you all is in the pandemic, the industry canceled orders en masse because we all panicked, right? How many of us were sitting on our Zoom screen, not sure whether we were going to buy clothes? And what that did was a ripple effect, which meant women around the world were not going to get paid for work already done. And our viral campaign, the Pay Up campaign, it was a time where we organized on Instagram and on social media because we couldn't be out on the streets. We made enough noise that 25 brands reversed decision, reinstated contracts, $22 billion worth of contracts, which meant that wages were paid at a time that vaccines had not yet reached these communities. And there are many other examples of campaigns on our website, remake.world, but I'll stop there so we can chat. But it is an example of the power of what happens, because sometimes I think we get stuck in our individual decisions. And for here at Remake, and Sophia and Amy will share more of like the individual ways that we celebrate making, right? We have swaps and mending circles and conversations and film screenings, but then it's all the ways of like, and then how do we come together to really move the needle in a bigger way? One other example that I wanted to share with you all is, where do you think most production in the US is today? Which state? Any idea? Right here, California. When we outsourced manufacturing starting in the early 1990s, and again, we sort of went to every country where the minute it got more expensive, we went somewhere else. So, China was making more value-added garment, we went to Bangladesh, we went to Cambodia, but there are still 100,000 workers left right here in the United States. And the biggest fashion production hub is in downtown LA. There's some 45,000, mostly Latina women, who till 2 years ago were making between $3 and $5 an hour. You guys live in California. Can you live on $3 and $5 an hour? And so our community mobilized, and we worked with the local garment worker community in LA, a lot of thoughtful, ethical brands like Mara Hoffman, like Reformation, and we helped pass into law the Garment Worker Protection Act, which now garment workers make the minimum wage, which, by the way, California leads the way of having an actual minimum wage that's more livable than a lot of states. And what our law in California states is that brands are jointly liable for wage theft in factories along with manufacturers. So what that means is Ross and Forever 21 that are sitting in doing a lot of production in California, if a factory shuts down, if a factory is bankrupt, then they have to make the workers whole, same as the factory. And it's the first time in the history of the fashion industry that we're closing that gap between what brands told us in Rana Plaza, right? Not my workers, not my problem. We now have a federal bill, the Fabric Act, that New York Senator Gillibrand reintroduced in this Congress session, that will do something similar for American workers across the US. And so I'll stop there to say, really, like when I think of sustainability, I really think it's the little steps of conversations like this. I quite like the more intimate audience because we can have a conversation. It's the things that we can do as individuals, but then what we can do as a collective, because truly, unless we regulate this industry, unless we are campaigning and building an industry that better matches our values, I have a lot of friends who entered the industry starry-eyed and started to get disillusioned to say, is this really the way that we are approaching the beauty and creativity of what fashion should be? And so I thank you so much for listening to me, and I want to turn it over to Amy and Sophia to share some things that you could do right here, because we have chapters around the world, 82 different countries, and our Bay Area community is wonderful. And then really open it up for questions.
Yeah, so my name's Sophia. I'm actually a BFA textile design student.
I love that in the house.
Graduate in May, so I'm super excited for that. But I found Remake about 3 years ago. I was on my sustainability design journey. After watching the Truth class in 2015, I was like, I need to switch this up. So I was looking for communities to be a part of, and Remake came on my radar. At that time, yes, we were advocating for the SB 62, the Garment Worker Protection Act for California. And after mobilizing in that and doing what we can through social networks, like the law passed.
You send a lot of postcards to government.
Yes.
His wife actually tweeted the Vogue story afterwards. So
Yeah.
that was really sort of speaking truth to power.
Well, it felt amazing. It felt that, like, just the little steps we do can actually affect us on a larger scale. And the fact that this is now contributing to the Fabric Act, it's huge. So yeah, this is a really exciting time to be part of sustainability in fashion. I think there's a lot of changes we need to make, but it feels a little bit overwhelming taking it on by yourself. So that's why Remake has things called a Remake Fashion Certificate, which is
It's free.
yes.
Yes.
I know school can be overwhelming, but this resource is there if you're interested in learning more about sustainability, elevating equity and design thinking. There's about 15 hours of this course, and you will get a certification, which you can put on your LinkedIn thereafter.
Especially when you're graduating. And there's also a forum as a part of the certificate, so you can be in conversation with other people who are in the learning journey to sort of chat and share with them, and learn with resources. We also know that people are different types of learners. So we've got, You know, there's an auditory part of it, you could listen, there's a video part of it, you could watch, and then there's an engagement community part of it, because again, we really do believe so much of this starts with education.
Yeah, so that's what I really value Remake, you know, Amy and I, to bring it more locally for those who are here in the Bay Area, we are organizers. So what we do is we put together events here in the Bay Area and have been doing so for about 2 years or 2.5 years now. So that looks like clothing swaps, DIY workshops, we had sustainable vendors, a fashion show, just kind of bringing the community together, bringing these conversations, but in a fun way. So yeah, this is some video clips that's not playing, but last year we did an event called where we upcycled denim and
Oh, the denim by nature.
yeah, denim by nature. It's a denim bag workshop. So we work with a local place called Seatlow, where people learn how to make their own denim bags out of denim they no longer needed. And then a part of that, we also are speaking into schools and being part of the younger generation too, because they seem to be really interested in this.
You've mentored so many high school students, and what's so exciting is we're increasingly getting inquiries from middle schools and high schools
Yeah.
who study the sustainable development goals, and they've picked sustainable fashion as their choice. And so it's been amazing to see you mentor the next generation as well as asking these questions.
But it's also like nice to be a part of this community as a whole, right? You know, like we have a WhatsApp chat, which you're more than welcome to join. This is our Bay Area Remake communities, at least some members at our last meetup. We host a meetup every third Wednesday of the month. We actually have one tonight if you want to join. It's from 5 to 7 at Della Coffee. We'll give more information later, but yeah, so not only being part of the Bay Area Remake community in our WhatsApp chat, there's an opportunity to become an ambassador. So being an ambassador, then you're linked into our monthly Remake community calls, which is an international community with over 75 countries and over 2,000 ambassadors. We also have workshops, online seminars and panels, just this plethora of resources.
And one of the things our ambassadors have said that's so fun is that they now look up remakers in different zip codes.
Yeah.
So when Sophia is going to go to New York, our New York chapter is massive, just like our Bay Area. Some of our ambassadors went to Italy and London and they found remakers there. And these are all people sort of in and around the fashion industry. So part of your ambassador, and again, it's free, it's sort of just a way for us to connect people, is we're connecting you by zip code and also interest area. So within the Remake Hub, there's a job board for sustainable fashion jobs. There's a way to connect and ask community when you have a question. And then to Sophia's point, you know, every first Monday of the month, we have a community call. And because it is international, it's an opportunity to sometimes hear from garment worker leaders, sometimes hear from ethical fashion designers. You know, we've had Casey Reese, Mara Hoffman, the head of Reformation, but we've also had Nasma Akhtar, the biggest union organizer in Bangladesh. So it's an opportunity to really do that online connection and then locally build connection in a way that feels fun and not like one more thing you have to do.
Yeah. So yeah, these are just resources for you to have, and communities for you to be a part of. And yeah, since joining Remake, I feel like so connected to just the sustainable family. Like, yeah, going to Italy or going to New York, or Amy just went to LA and
That's right.
yeah. Yeah, so to continue to this dialogue, which is crucial, but to also understand it from an international part, like segment as well, is really important.
We have a few questions from our about 30 attendees between Zoom and YouTube. So one question is, please share the equity chart after the Zoom, the equity chart that you mentioned, if it's possible to share that resource. Then we have another question, how to join Remake as an ambassador.
Yes, so there's the QR code. It's a simple application. What happens is We want to make sure you're not a bot, you're an actual person. So once you complete the application, there's an onboarding where you hear from one of our staff members who does a very short 30-minute Zoom, sort of helping you understand all the host of resources that are available to you. Once you've done that, there's the monthly community calls, there's the Slack channel, there's the WhatsApp group. So there's a whole host of things. But the first step really is that QR code, and that's how you start the process of being a Remake ambassador. And our hope is that this is not just something you do, like Sophia said, it's so powerful when you win a campaign or you pass a law, but the thing we hear when we survey our ambassadors every year is just the lifelong communities and connections that they make, so that this is a thriving community.
And there is another question, what Ayesha Barenblat on Zoom is asking, what are your thoughts on the trashy take-back bags? Is there an effective way to recycle?
We have a partnership. Amy, do you wanna? The partnership with the,
Trashy take-back bags.
Just
Deals on-
deals on designers.
Yeah. So one of the ways, people are always asking us about how take-back schemes can sort of be a scam. I don't know if you all have seen, but there are some investigative journalists who put air tags into the take-back schemes of like H&M and other brands, even some of the sneaker take-backs, and they all end up, as I shared with you, in landfills, because you're not actually taking back a lot of what you're collecting. One, because the quality isn't great. Two, because it's just too much volume of clothes. So for someone listening, if you're thinking like, what do I do? It is spring closet cleaning time. The number one thing that we always say is your local thrift store, a lot better. There's sort of sizes of gray of like how good it is. If there are, thoughtful work dresses, for example, like Dress for Success, there are some local nonprofits that build a lot of equity lens to this. Amy was mentioning, we have a partnership with Deals on Designers, where we know that it's definitely going to the secondhand market, and a percentage of proceeds go to our movement building work. So I think there are ways of doing this responsibly, but honestly, the truth of the matter is we have to produce less and we have to buy less, because we're not going to be able to recycle our way out of 100 billion units of clothes. It's not going to happen.
there's a really cool campaign that Remake does over the summer called No New Clothes.
No new clothes?
Yeah, so for 90 days, it urges you to not buy anything new or not buy anything at all.
Yeah. And it's sort of like we call it a detox, like a fashion detox. And so our community will just unsubscribe from all the promotion emails and notifications on TikTok and Instagram, and we just take stock of what we have. And a lot of our programming is with like, stylists teaching you how to mix and match what you already have. A lot of swap events so you can refresh your wardrobe by sharing. But when you take the No New Clothes flight, we are able to calculate how much money we saved as a community, how much water we saved, and how much carbon. So it's also then a really fun badge of honor. But a lot of the people who take the 90-day pledge then share how their relationship is just reset. We had a woman who is a weather channel reporter, and there's a lot of pressure when you're on television to be wearing fresh clothes all the time. She's going on into like her second year of buying nothing. Wow. And she talks about just like how freeing it's been. Actress Nat Kelly did a whole diary as a celebrity actress on like, I'm buying nothing. So 90, that's another very easy in the summer if you want to take the No New Clothes challenge.
So going back to like giving our stuff instead of like taking it back to the actual retailers and going back to thrift stores. I know there was a whole story, like it's been kind of happening a lot. It's like people don't want to really go to thrift stores anymore because of the prices that they put on there. Like I know for some of the places where I'm from in North Carolina, when people go to like a thrift store, it's like, oh, it's $20 now, or it's $3. And some people have an issue with like, this is supposed to be a place where people who can't afford going to malls and stuff can actually feel good about actually shopping, getting something nice. How do we reconcile with giving our stuff to these thrift stores or shopping at thrift stores, knowing that like they're making just as much of a profit off of the things that we bought as some of these retailers who aren't paying their workers.
Yeah, it's, this is where none of these are a silver bullet answer. We often say, look, a Poshmark or a ThredUp or some of those mega secondhand markets is very different from your local community thrift store. And so that's one, right? It's like not all donations are the same. So for us, it's always like the more local it is, the more we know it'll stay a part of the shared economy. I think the second is something that's really important that you bring up, and we've done stories on this, that the more we normalize secondhand and thrifting, there does become this question of class warfare, that, there are communities that rely on secondhand, and now you're driving up the price, which is why, again, we keep leaning back to this idea of style over trends, because if you're buying thrift in volume for your Poshmark page, you're still part of the problem,
Yeah.
so it's also to say, like, none of these are one easy answer. Like, I'm just going to recycle, or I'm just going to thrift. It really is, to Sophia's point, of that detox of, it's a lifestyle change of fashion should be about style and not volume.
That's why clothing swaps are amazing.
Say that again.
Clothing swaps.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they did one here. Didn't you all do one here?
We did last semester.
We could do it again.
Yeah.
We just did one last week at
Last week.
KQED NPR right here in the Bay Area. There was some really cute items, and
Yeah.
people were really excited about. That's the other thing. You may get tired of something, but for someone else, that might be a treasure.
I think that's the best part, is like seeing it like give or go to someone else and you're like, oh my god, it's a piece.
Yeah.
Okay, I think my question is kind of maybe too complex, but I'll try to explain. With slowing down the buying, slowing down the volumes of production, how should we, more globally, fashion professionals, how could we help manufacturers to reinvent themselves and still give jobs to people where they rely on those jobs?
Yeah.
So just by slowing or not buying, do we resolve the problem? Can we perhaps teach those local entrepreneurs to direct this to a completely different avenue, or those businesses to become something different? Maybe suggesting them that model, saying, hey, we don't need to produce that much, but here's what you can do instead with that facility that you have already, with that equipment, with those workers who are already trained to do certain type of operations, without taking that job from them, redirect it to a different, completely different avenue, different
Yeah.
field, or adjacent
Yeah.
field. What do you think?
I think it's such an important question, and this is why within our work, we talk about climate justice, not climate change, right? Because it's sort of related to your question around a lot of the conversation around circularity, around climate impacts, around the industry needing to be different, is focused on the parts of the industry that has grabbed onto most of the value, keeping that value. So like what I mean by that is, the question I think you're asking is, okay, say we today produce less, which by the way, we're nowhere close to saying, despite all the climate goals, year over year, the industry continues to grow between 2 to 3%. We saw that last year, we saw that the year before. So despite thrifting becoming normalized, or all the conversation around circularity, one of the things we're seeing today is that circular systems are operating in parallel to linear production. So what we mean by that is the industry is like, some people are interested in circularity or sustainable materials or the secondhand. So we are testing this in a capsule way, but yet our year over year linear production from virgin material is going up. So one is not replacing the other at all. So partly to say this is a theoretical conversation because it's not happening. And a lot of brand executives will say, we aren't seeing the money in it yet either, partly because fossil fuel is so cheap. But I think this is why a lot of our work with our labor partners is about increasing wages, because we know that this industry cannot operate at a volume and with these jobs forever. And so we often talk about wages as a climate solution, because if this industry is to produce less, or in a more innovative way, or in a way that we are part of the share economy, then we owe to the 70 million, mostly women of color, who are not able to exit this industry or take on the more technologically savvy jobs. To what is that justice lens to this work? And that's why so much of this conversation is also about her safety, her wages, and it has to be a piece of that. Yeah.
I think what gave me a lot of insight from a design perspective and trying to make ethical design choices, and I'm still very much learning, was taking the advocacy report and like working it backwards. Like, so see how you score people and like really researching, okay, like how does this look like? And you can't really hit all marks of the sustainable aspect, but if you focus on like 1 to 3, like you're pretty set. Also, there's on the pamphlets on the back, there's other local resources that are here in the Bay Area, such as art reuse and fabric stores. If you haven't been to these, like Scrap, East Bay Community Reuse, or Urban Ore for your supplies, highly suggested.
Yeah.
It's just, let's just be there.
Yeah.
This space is amazing.
But there's also these other learning centers, but there are also other communities that you could be a part of. Fiber Shed is key.
Amazing, yeah.
So they have this Borrow from the Soil Design Challenge where they actually connect designers to local manufacturers and local fiber weavers and farmers.
And also like right here in the North Bay, you
Yeah.
know, and they have a ways to come and meet and connect with the local farmers and weavers. So there are localized solutions. I
Yeah.
think for any sustainable brand, you know, the answer is always hyper local. And how do you build value and growth that's not predicated on more unit output? I think that is sort of the design challenge of the future, is how we create clothes that last longer, that can be a part of the shared economy, and at the same time be profitable. And I think there's some early models of that, but there's like a lot of innovation needed in that space. And at the same time, we're needing to regulate the excesses of how the industry is operating today. Please.
So
I'll come back to you.
I have like 100 questions, but I'm just gonna focus on one, because I think you touch on things that we've talked about for years and years and years
Yeah.
here. But I was on a flight recently, and I think I saw a documentary, I think it was called Mother of Pearl, and it's a fashion brand where they won the LVMH prize, and then they spent 2 years trying to develop a brand that was completely sustainable for what that meant to them. My question is anyone doing this correctly? Anyone?
Yeah, and you know, I'd say it's really difficult to do this correctly, right? We're talking about some of the world's most wicked problems through the lens of fashion. And so for us internally, it's often this conversation of let's lift up the innovation that we see rather than trying to be purists. You know, because if anyone says you're a sustainable brand, they are a sustainable brand, it's just not true, right? Like we often say, it's like, oh, okay, so you use organic cotton. But if that organic cotton was picked by a child, is that sustainable? Or you say that you're using natural dyes, but the workers weren't paid for it, is that, you know? So I think it just gets so complex so quickly that what I would point you to is, where are we seeing some light that we can use as a model or an example? So Hope for Flowers, Tracy Reese's new label, you know, it's Detroit based, it's really grounded in local community. She's thinking about the human rights side and the environmental side, and also wanting the label to be a way to sort of build that economic empowerment locally. And so I think that's a really interesting model. On the environmental side, I think Mara Hoffman has made a lot of strides and is also very open about how difficult this is as a small brand, you know, worked with Fiber Shed to embed some of the more sustainable materials. But really, it's very difficult, I'd say, for the smaller brands to thrive, is what we hear time and time again. Triarchy Denim, very interesting. It's a soil to soil denim solution. They just were showcased at the Green Carpet Challenge. Apparently, you can literally eat from the jeans. So it's biodegradable, compostable. So this is where I think I see some glimmers of hope. And you know, the thing is, it's when it comes to the wage conversation and paying people fairly, and then making it a product that can keep up with the competition, I think that's when it gets very difficult. Because we have become so hardwired to not pay that much for what clothes should cost. And you all know this, sitting on a sewing machine, it's hard work, you know?
I have a question. Does Remake have, or maybe has a plan to build this sort of an online database of the companies who do it right? So say if one wants to contact the press agency, who is notorious for supporting the values the right way,
Yeah,
or so something that would be broader than just designer brands.
yeah,
And would include retailers, again, press agencies, showrooms and trade shows.
yeah. I
Do
will
you
tell
have
you,
access to those kind of
our,
systems?
our focus has really been on what can we do individually, what can we do as a collective to really focus on the climate wage conversation, because there's so much monopoly in our industry. Look at a few holding companies, brands and retailers. There's 50 brands that own most of the pie of this industry. And so in the early days, we did try, and honestly, some of this was a bandwidth issue. Some of our stories, some of our community organizing, we highlight the innovation. But I think it's also very difficult because you can't, in the early days, for example, we tried to play with like giving a Remake seal of approval. But here's what happens to a lot of ethical and sustainable brands. The minute they get bigger,
Yes.
they lose some of that ethos and value. It's really hard to grow and meet market demand and keep those founding ethos. It's an evolving pace. Reformation is a great example of this. You could visit their factory in LA. You could walk up and down, you could see. The minute they got bigger, it's mostly coming from other places now. The supply chain is not here anymore. So this is where we really hesitate with this question of good or black and white. It's like, look, there's some innovation and an eye on the prize. So we think much better, like we passed a law, 45,000 women make a minimum wage, better,
Maybe I'll rephrase that.
Yes.
If you were a fashion design student now and you wanted to support everything that you wanted, where would you want to work? Because I think the community that we're talking to here are about to go out, not working, going to go to work, looking for brands that support their beliefs. I think if you can easily point people in that direction, that would be.
So I'm going to give you a different answer than maybe what people want to hear. Because I'm like, look, there are sustainable brands. A lot of them don't have money. They don't pay really well. I would actually venture to say, go work for a big brand. Go work for a big bad brand. Learn how the industry works. And then be a change maker from within. We have remakers working, PVH, LVMH, like all the big houses. But much as we are doing the sort of grassroots organizing, there's that sort of patience of working within and starting to ask these questions and having that patience. Because what we hear from a lot of people that I want to build my own sustainable brand, or I want to go work for a completely ethical brand. And the truth is, I would not be setting you all up for success by saying, go do that. Because one, a lot of the sustainable brands went belly up in the pandemic. Two, a lot of them don't have much money and there's not that many jobs to come by. You know this, you're in the job market. And three, most of the industry doesn't operate in that manner. So I would much rather, the head of our advocacy is a woman who ran the knit department for Ralph Lauren for 30 years. She knows how the industry works. And so I think it's sort of that inside out strategy also of, work where you work, but then can you lend your voice as a citizen, as a change maker to our local, national, global efforts to get our arms around this industry? Our London ambassadors showed up in Parliament to give testimony. Like, to me, those are the things we're needing to be doing.
Does Remake have any resources for like a brand that wants to become?
No, there are others that do that.
Right.
Common objectives that are other, because again, for us, this was about building the thriving community, do education work of what's at stake, and then really eye on the prize of how do we pass the right laws, win the right campaigns around climate and wages. And we're a staff of 10. We're small, nimble. Our community is, 2,000 organizers. We reach the millions of people. So we have to also sort of stay in our lane. But the sad thing is, I think a lot of the consultants that provide sustainability advice to companies are not necessarily talking to the decision makers. I would venture to say, a lot of people will say, oh, I care so much, I want to work as chief sustainability officer at a brand. And I'd always tell you, don't do that. Like, if you could be head of sourcing, you could be head of design, you could be head of merchandising. That's where the value and power sits. You know, sustainability in many ways, what we've seen is it's a risk mitigation exercise at best. You're trying to stay out of trouble, or it's a greenwashing marketing exercise for many. And it's very hard for you from within to try and change when the way that you're placing orders, writing contracts, moving product is fundamentally opposed to the goals you're setting up for yourself.
Sorry, it just reminded me of,
Yeah.
well, I had a conversation with someone yesterday about this. And we talked about how when we went to a mill in Italy last summer, and they literally hand saw garments, wool garments, into colors, blend them out. And the biggest problem they had that they said to share with every designer, so I'm just reminding this is a good platform, is the trims that you use aren't sustainable. They're not
Right.
biodegradable.
And then you can't at the end of life
You have to
separate
take them off,
it
so
out.
whether it's the button, so I think if you could make a change
Yeah,
to help that, then you could be like the care content label person that said, no,
Exactly.
this has to be.
And that's what you've sort of done is like, look at our report and then retroactively, like as a designer, what does this mean for me?
But design clothing that either is, you know, zipper button free, so it's all repurposed, recyclable, biodegradable.
Exactly. And that's the example of triarchy, and so how there are these you're designing from the beginning with intent rather than trying to retroactively deal with the problem, because all routes, and that's why we used to do these learning journeys with designers, because it was so much of this was like, gosh, all roads lead back to design, whether it's the sort of human rights side or the environmental side. I will say though, it depends on where you end up and how many decisions you can make. You know, talking to friends who are designers at Gap or other places, it's a lot of pattern making, and you're not making a lot of the decisions on where things are, like where the trims are coming from. It's so highly specialized and fragmented that I think this is another reason why we're needing a lot of education across different departments, because production is so far removed from design in a lot of these big retail, and you know this better.
I know, and that's exactly what, you know, here's the point, is that if you can design something that answers the end goal already,
Right.
then you're kind of halfway there. I would hope to think.
And just to sort of bring back, and you know, I can stay here for questions, but in terms of sometimes these conversations feel so overwhelming, and we always come back to, well, what do you do? And so first to say, like, if you're on Instagram, like, give us a follow, Remake Our World. It's very simple. We don't take any corporate money. All of our data, all of our campaigns, it's sort of a way to just stay in the know. So that's something very simple you could do today, right? Is give us a follow, start to learn and be a part of the community. The other thing, if you're curious, especially at a very local Bay Area level, Amy and Sophia have QR codes. They have a very active WhatsApp group. Sometimes we understand, even being an ambassador, you want to think about it. It's join the WhatsApp group, show up to a local community meeting, see what you think. I often think of when you're doing movement building work, it can feel lonely. And so finding your online and local communities, that first step, so you know you're not alone. So if you're interested, join the WhatsApp group, come to a local meetup. And really, I'd say for our educator partners, it's to keep these conversations going. You know, when we started, we'd be hard pressed to find an audience. And now there are 30 different universities that partner with us, whether we Zoom in or do in-person conversations like this, but we also make all our educational resources free. You know, video footage of what it looks like in Ghana, or worker testimony from garment workers through our made in films, or the accountability report. So there's lots of ways to put this into the classrooms. I will say it's in a very exciting time. You know, it used to be even 10 years ago that we were not as mainstream in terms of interest. But I think what we're now needing to do is sort of harness the interest towards real action. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We can bring our Zoom attendees on the screen if you want to before Before,
If there's any
closing
more
this part,
questions, yeah.
Yes, I completely forgot to make photo, but yes, I had another question of how as a faculty we could incorporate this in classes, so that we do have it already, sustainability is not anymore a separate class, it's just embedded in
Which is
many
better.
courses, just
Yeah.
like technology is, we don't necessarily have specific technology classes for some specific software, of course, but overall, it's just like a transversal value that is kind of a thread throughout the
Yeah.
conversations in many classes. But what would be the best way to do it, kind of from a more monthly, semester from semester basis?
Yeah,
Do
I
you
mean,
like
I'd say
students
the
to-
accountability report is a wonderful, rich resource of, here's a snapshot of how the industry is doing, right? Across climate, across their own stated environmental and human rights goals. So we could get that to you as a teaching tool. The Maiden films, I think, is a wonderful example. Then I think conversations like this, right? More places where we can have a conversation and an activation, whether that's a swap or whether that, locally thinking about what could good design look like. There's a lot of local innovators, designers right here in the Bay Area that are also sort of looking for that connection to fashion schools. This industry is so creative. I just think that if we could put that creativity towards these goals, there's so much we could do. And we're happy to make the connection, with other schools, it's something like this, conversations or just taking our resources and running with them and making it part of their curriculum.
I have two more questions.
Yeah.
Sophia mentioned a documentary coming up
Yes.
soon.
So on April 9th, we have a new documentary dropping on HBO Max. It's called Brandon Elwood and the Cult of Fast Fashion. Perhaps maybe you guys want to screen it here. I could come, the director's local too, or have a watch.
Sorry.
Yeah,
We have in product development, there's more of a sustainable based class, but I think that might be nice to kind of.
Screening the product development class, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, it could be
Also.
you guys could come talk because, I think part of what that film is trying to explain is often there's a misunderstanding that if something is made in the US or the UK, it's like, that's a question too. Yeah.
We apologize for trying to not
No.
using the thoughts, but it's very. Yeah, it's
Definitely.
Christy.
Yeah, the documentary sort of looks at clothes made in Italy, and with this recognition that there are sweatshops everywhere. I think people seem to think like, oh, this is only Asia's problem. And I'll tell you, you want to come see sweatshops, come to Leicester, UK, come to Prato, Italy, come to downtown LA. There are good and bad factories everywhere. And this understanding that it really goes down to the business model and how brands are treating workers and what their contracts look like. But also this is a very cult brand. And so the hope is like through that lens of the brand, connecting the dots between all of these issues of this really is a feminist issue, a climate issue, a hard time. You can see firsthand sort of the impacts of Ghana in the documentary as well. So we'll be in touch, our community organizers will have a trailer and such in a few short.
Maybe we could do like the Roxy Cinema, I don't know, and then just invite it, so the
Yeah.
full on public event. And then
That
just
would be
host
great.
it.
That could be fun, and have a conversation around the film.
No, we can share all that.
Do you do programs with high schoolers as well, or it's mostly at university
Yeah,
level? Because that
so-
awareness starts very early.
Yeah, it's and as you're saying, we are getting more requests even from middle schools. In fact, I'm going to 2 middle schools Friday and Monday where they're studying the SDGs and they voted for
Oh, wow.
sustainable fashion to be their volume of study. And it's amazing because also a lot of the ultra fast fashion are marketing to a younger and younger customer, and Sophia's done a lot of mentorship with high school students. There's isn't it Berkeley High that did a full secondhand fashion
Yeah,
show?
they did a sustainable fashion show day, so they donated all the things to Remake. They just showed up, talked, but like all the students made like these upcycled garments. It's super cool.
They
Yeah,
came back and asked us to do
a workshop.
climate, they're doing a climate summit, and so we're doing a denim jewelry workshop to their students.
It's really just fun to see youngest change makers, and I always believe like start them young,
Yeah.
like starting to see and make these connections. And for a lot of that audience, it's also coming to us from a climate lens, you know. So it's a sunrise movement, other movements were like, this is an issue of our time.
You can bring our Zoom agendas so this can be.
I think the computer
Yeah.
froze
Oh.
on the,
So we have some left, but some are in queue.
yeah.
Thanks so much. We'll be in touch.
So sorry about that, but the computer's frozen. I'm gonna have to.
We'll.
Thank you everyone who attended us on Zoom. Yeah, and stay tuned for more resources we'll be sharing from Ayesha. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we're all so inspired and.
It's the Indians that do all the hard work. It's all them, yeah.
Where can we get the merch?
Oh, you have to be an ambassador.